I was in the middle of a call with the Pentagon when my stepfather barged in, yelling at the top of his lungs. Before I could finish giving a classified update, he slapped a pair of cold metal handcuffs on my wrists and shouted, "You think you can boss people around in my house?" 10 minutes later, 5 black SUVs pulled up outside our tiny house in South Bay Ridge. And the look on his face? Pure horror. Because what he didn't know, what no one in my family knew, was that I was a general. You want to know how I ended up here? Then like the video, drop a comment, and don't forget not to subscribe to the channel for more wild revenge stories like this. Let me tell you how it all began. My name is Jordan. I'm 43 years old. I've served in the U.S. Army for 29 years. I worked my way up in silence. I never bragged, never told anyone what I really did for a living. Even my family thought I just worked a boring office job. I let them think that, because the truth, it wasn't safe for them to know. Not until now. My story starts way back when I was just 14 and living in South Bay Ridge. My mom married Fred, a short, loud man with a huge ego and nothing to back it up. He ran a small plumbing company, but acted like he owned half the town. He had one rule: his word was law. And if you dared to talk back, you got the belt. I learned fast to keep my head down. He called it tough love. I called it cruelty. Mom changed after she married him. She stopped smiling, stopped singing in the kitchen like she used to. She always looked tired, always quiet. When I asked her if she was okay, she'd say, "Don't worry about me, baby." So I stopped asking. Fred had 2 kids from a previous marriage, Dean and Monica. Dean was older by 3 years. He bullied me nonstop, called me Army girl because I kept a stash of camo notebooks and survival books under my bed. I loved reading about tactics, discipline, and leadership. It helped me escape. It gave me hope. Monica was worse. She was my age, but cruel in a quiet, sneaky way. She'd steal my clothes, blame me when stuff went missing, and spread rumors at school that I was a thief. I got detention for things I didn't do, and teachers started treating me like I was trouble. No one defended me. Not Mom. Not my teachers. And definitely not Fred. At 17, I left home with just a duffel bag and a high school diploma. I enlisted the very next day. Fred didn't even drive me to the recruitment center. He just said, "Don't come crawling back when it gets hard out there." But I didn't crawl. I climbed. Boot camp was hard, sure, but it was nothing compared to living under Fred's roof. Every time my drill sergeant yelled at me, I stood straighter. Every time I was told I couldn't, I pushed harder. I learned fast. I earned respect. I made it my mission to never be powerless again. Over the years, I became the kind of soldier people trusted in a crisis. I didn't care about fame or medals. I cared about doing what was right. That's why I got promoted fast. I worked in intelligence, then special operations, and later strategic command. Most of my missions were so classified that I wasn't even allowed to say the names of the countries I'd been in. And then, one day, I became a general. But back home, no one knew. Not because I was hiding, but because no one asked. Every holiday, I sent cards and gifts. They'd thank me with one-line texts, if at all. I flew in twice a year. Fred would grunt, Dean would ignore me, and Monica would ask if I could help pay for her kids' birthday gifts. Not once did anyone say, "We're proud of you." Not once. After Mom passed away, things got worse. Fred kept her house and acted like I had no right to even set foot in it. But I let it go. I didn't want to start drama. I still visited on Christmas and Thanksgiving, brought gifts, played nice. But this last visit was different. I had just returned from an 8-month assignment overseas. I hadn't slept properly in 4 days. The Pentagon needed urgent details on a situation I can't even name, because it involved nuclear threats. High level, immediate action. I told my team I'd be available even while visiting family. I had a secured line, a laptop, and encryption tools with me. I was ready. I arrived at the house that morning. Monica was already there with her kids. Dean was sitting on the couch watching football like he lived there. Fred opened the door and just said, "Took you long enough." I smiled and handed him a gift, a leather wallet with his initials on it. He tossed it on the side table like it was trash. "What's this for?" "Just something I thought you might like." "Humph. You think money fixes everything, don't you?" I didn't reply. I just went to the spare room, set up my equipment, and logged into the secure network. I had an urgent call scheduled for 9 a.m. At 8:55 I got a ping. The Pentagon conference room was ready. I connected. On the screen were 5 faces, top brass advisors and one very serious civilian analyst. We were discussing real-time data from an ally nation. And that's when it happened. Bam! Fred kicked the door open and stormed in. "What the hell is all this? Why is there a weird voice coming from your computer?" I tried to wave him out. "Not now. I'm in the middle of something." "Don't you raise your hand at me," he barked. "You don't come into my house and act like you own the place. You think you're better than us, huh?" "Fred, I need you to leave this room now." "Oh, I'll do better than that," he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a pair of steel handcuffs. He had bought them years ago during some short-lived security guard phase and kept them in his drawer like a toy. I stood up fast, but he was faster. He yanked my wrist and snapped the cuff on. "Let's see you talk down to people now, tough girl." I tried to explain. I told him I was on a sensitive government call. I told him this wasn't a joke. He just laughed. "What are you gonna do? Call the cops? You're in my house." Then he stormed out, leaving me cuffed to the bedpost with my Pentagon call still active on the screen. I could hear muffled voices through the laptop. I used my foot to slide the chair close and yell, "Compromise! Compromise in progress." Then the screen went dark. I was locked in the room. Outside I heard laughing. The TV was loud. Monica yelling at her kids. Dean talking about beer. I sat there, cuffed, helpless, and fuming. 5 minutes later, the first SUV pulled up. Then another. Then another. One by one, 5 black SUVs lined up in front of the house, tires screeching. Fred opened the front door, chewing gum like nothing was happening. He stepped onto the porch and froze. Men in suits and black shades approached fast. One lifted his hand, spoke into his sleeve. Another carried a lock override kit. Then one said the words that made Fred nearly drop to his knees. "Where is General Jordan Moore?" His face turned pale like chalk. And me? I just smiled from the spare room. Fred didn't answer the agent standing at the door. He just blinked, mouth half open, as if someone had unplugged his brain. The lead agent, a tall woman in a sharp black suit, gave him 2 seconds of silence before she stepped forward, brushing past him like he wasn't even there. "I repeat," she said, her voice cutting through the house like a blade. "Where is General Jordan Moore?" That's when Dean, still on the couch with his feet up, chuckled like it was a prank. "Wait, Jordan's a general now," he laughed. "Okay, who paid you guys for this birthday joke?" The second agent swept past him without a word. Dean raised his hands like, "Whoa, okay." The third SUV door slammed shut, and a man in full military uniform stepped out. A decorated colonel. He marched up the porch stairs with authority, spoke into his earpiece, and followed the other agents inside. Meanwhile, I was still cuffed to the bedpost, muscles aching, furious and embarrassed. I had shouted for help through the laptop, but there was no confirmation. For a moment, I feared the call had dropped before my words got through. Then the door to the spare room burst open. "Ma'am," the lead agent said, spotting me in the cuffs. "Are you injured?" I shook my head, finally seeing the look of relief cross her face. She turned and gave a sharp nod. "Secure the area." Another agent came over with bolt cutters and snipped the cuffs like paper. I rubbed my wrists as the colonel stepped inside, eyes wide. "General," he said, straightening, "we received your compromise alert. You were not secure, so we deployed immediate response. I nodded. Good work, Colonel. Situation under control now. Fred, who had followed them down the hall, finally found his voice. Wait, what do you mean, General? She's not, she's my stepdaughter. The colonel turned and looked him dead in the eye. She's your superior officer, sir, and you handcuffed her during an active classified communication with the Pentagon. That's a federal offense. Fred stammered. I didn't know. I thought she was just playing pretend. The agents moved him back as the colonel stepped in front of me. Orders, General? I breathed slowly, calming myself. Get the secured line back up. I need to finish the call. Yes, ma'am. One of the agents retrieved my laptop, now slightly cracked on the side. Another had already set up a mobile secure network booster in the hallway. Monica peeked in from the kitchen. Her jaw dropped when she saw the badges, the weapons, the straight-back posture of every person in uniform. One of the agents gave her a brief nod. Ma'am, please return to the living room and stay seated. Dean finally stood from the couch and raised his hands. Hold on. There's no way this is real. I've known Jordan my whole life. She's not a general. She wears hoodies and eats microwave dinners. There's no way. Then his eyes fell on the uniform patch peeking out of my duffel bag, half-zipped. The 4 stars were impossible to miss. Monica's face turned red. You lied to us, she snapped. All these years, acting like you're some regular person, when really you're a soldier, I said calmly. That's all I ever was. She scoffed and turned back to the hallway. Fred, on the other hand, had completely frozen up. He leaned against the wall, palms sweaty, breathing heavy. His face looked older all of a sudden, like the truth had aged him 10 years in 10 seconds. I ignored him. I had work to do. The laptop connected again, and within moments I was back on the secure call. The Pentagon line buzzed in. General Moore, are you stable? Affirmative, I answered. Compromised by family interference. Not intentional espionage. We're clear now. Understood. Proceed with the next stage. As I began delivering the update, the agents surrounded the room, keeping noise to a minimum. They treated me with the kind of sharp respect that only comes after years of battle-tested loyalty. Outside the house, neighbors had gathered. 5 black SUVs in front of Fred's lawn wasn't exactly subtle. Some pulled out their phones. Others whispered to each other. I knew it was only a matter of time before the whole block started speculating. After 15 minutes, I signed off the call, stood up, and rolled my shoulders. The colonel approached again. We've got local police on standby if you want to file charges. I looked at Fred. The man couldn't even meet my eyes. He'd always thought of me as the small, quiet girl with big dreams and no chance. He used to laugh when I said I wanted to join the military, told everyone it was just a phase. And now he was standing in his own hallway, watching officers salute the girl he handcuffed like a dog. Not yet, I told the colonel, but keep him on a watch list. He gets no access to my records or any of my locations from now on. Understood. The agents began packing up. As they moved past Dean, he cleared his throat. So, if you're like a general and all, does that mean you've got money? One of the agents stopped and gave him a stare that could melt steel. Dean chuckled awkwardly and backed away. Once everything was packed, I stood at the door and looked at all 3 of them. Fred, Dean, Monica. Not one of them said thank you. Not one said sorry. They just stood there, quiet and angry, like I had done something wrong. I walked out without saying goodbye. But I wasn't done. Not even close. Because if they thought that was the end, they had no idea what was coming. Later that week, Monica's husband lost his job because a background check flagged that his emergency contact had been involved in a federal compromise incident. She called me crying, saying she needed help with rent. Dean's credit card was flagged too. Turns out, some family gifts I sent had tracking information the banks didn't like. His entire account got frozen for 48 hours. As for Fred, his plumbing license was up for renewal, but somehow it got delayed, and someone filed a noise complaint about a dozen times for yelling at children. It wasn't me, of course, but I knew people who didn't forget. Still, I hadn't truly started my revenge. Not yet. That would come soon, because Fred thought the embarrassment was over. He thought 5 SUVs and a few stern looks were the worst of it. But the next time I showed up, it wouldn't be for Christmas. It would be for something much bigger and much, much louder. Fred didn't call. Monica didn't text. Dean tried to message me once asking if I could put in a good word for him with a company hiring veterans. I didn't respond. I was busy. I had just wrapped up a debriefing at Langley when my aide, Sergeant Claire, walked in holding a file. "You sure you don't want to press charges?" she asked as she placed the file on my desk. I looked up at her. "No, but he handcuffed you during a Pentagon call." I leaned back in my chair, and now half his world is falling apart without me having to lift a finger. Claire grinned. "Fair enough." I opened the file. Inside were transcripts of every background check, every flag phone call, every minor federal violation tied to Fred's house. The agencies weren't targeting him yet, but they were watching, and they had every right to. Still, something about it didn't feel complete. Fred wasn't just a loud, angry man with an ego. He was a man who had spent decades tearing people down, starting with my mom. He'd stolen her light, replaced her joy with fear, and now that she was gone, he acted like her life never mattered. That's when I made the decision. He needed to be reminded that some actions have consequences, and some people you don't mess with. The perfect opportunity came a week later. An old friend of mine, General Dwight Hartley, called with an invitation. "Jordan," he said over the phone, "you still got your speech ready for the Veterans Gala?" I had almost forgotten. It was an annual black tie event for decorated veterans, military families, and high-ranking officials. Media always showed up. Sometimes the president did, too. "I've got it," I replied. "Good. You're our keynote this year." After I hung up, I stared at the RSVP list and smiled. Because this year, the gala was going to be televised. And Fred was about to see a version of me he never imagined. But I needed one more thing. A visit. Back to South Bay Ridge. This time I didn't come alone. I wore civilian clothes, plain jeans, a fitted black shirt, and boots. But behind me were 2 black SUVs and a staff sergeant in full dress uniform. We parked in front of Fred's house on a sunny Friday afternoon. He opened the door, looking confused. "You again?" "Yeah," I said calmly. "I'm here to collect something Mom left me." "She didn't leave you anything," he barked. "I got her will." "She left me a box," I said, stepping inside. "It was in the attic." Fred puffed up like he was about to argue, but paused when he saw the staff sergeant behind me. He stepped aside. "Fine, but you've got 5 minutes." I climbed the narrow attic stairs and pulled down the dusty, old trunk Mom had once shown me. Inside were photos, a hand-sewn quilt, and a folded American flag, the one from her father's funeral. A World War II vet. I carried it downstairs in silence. Fred stood by the couch, arms crossed. "What's all this for, huh? You gonna cry about your tough childhood now?" I looked at him, not with anger, with pity. "You should come to the gala," I said. "It's in Arlington next week. Veterans Day. Dress code's formal." He squinted. "Why would I go to that?" "Because it'll be the only time in your life you'll ever sit in a room full of people who matter." I walked out before he could respond. 2 days later, he RSVP'd. I wasn't surprised. Fred loved being seen. He probably thought he'd network with important people and shake hands with a senator. What he didn't know was that the spotlight was about to swing his way and burn. On the night of the gala, I stood backstage in full uniform, for stars gleaming on my shoulders. The ballroom was packed. Senators, commanders, diplomats, all seated in polished rows under golden chandeliers. Fred had shown up. He was in the back row, wearing a suit 2 sizes too big and chewing gum like he was at a high school reunion. I waited for my cue. The announcer stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our keynote speaker, General Jordan Moore." The room erupted in applause. Fred's head jerked up so fast, I thought he'd snap his neck. I walked onto the stage, heels clicking, and for the first time in my life I saw Fred look small. I spoke about sacrifice, about leadership, about the men and women who risk their lives every day without asking for praise. Then I paused and told them a story. "Years ago," I said slowly, scanning the room, "a girl sat in her bedroom reading survival books while her stepfather told her she'd never amount to anything. He said the world was too hard and she was too soft, that she'd come crawling back." I saw Fred shift in his seat. "But she didn't crawl," I continued. "She climbed, because kindness is not weakness, because silence does not mean defeat." The room was silent now. Every face was watching. She became a soldier, then a captain, then a major, and eventually a general, all without ever stepping on the necks of those beneath her. I looked straight at Fred. She didn't return to hurt the people who hurt her. She returned to show them what true power looks like. Applause exploded through the ballroom. People stood, cameras flashed, and Fred, he couldn't even clap. He just stared, hands trembling, as the woman he once called a waste of space stood before 1,000 people, respected, honored, unstoppable. After the speech, people came up to shake my hand. Fred stood near the wall, trying to blend into the shadows, but the reporters weren't stupid. They saw me glance his way. They followed my eyes. Some asked who he was. He didn't stay long. He left before dessert, but I wasn't finished. The next day, his face was in a military blog. Someone snapped a photo of him standing alone at the gala, looking like he'd swallowed a lemon. The caption, "Stepfather of 4-star general seen at Veterans Gala, looking unprepared." I didn't write it, but I laughed. Still, this wasn't the final play, because Fred had embarrassed me in front of my superiors. He handcuffed a general mid-operation. That needed one more answer, a very public one. A few days later, I got an email. It was from the Department of Justice. Apparently, someone had submitted a formal complaint against Fred for obstructing national security protocol. His hearing was scheduled in 2 weeks. And guess who was asked to testify? The courthouse smelled like old wood and new nerves. I stepped through the security checkpoint in full uniform. The officers nodded as I passed, some even saluting quietly. The courtroom itself wasn't large, but the energy inside was heavy, like the air knew what was coming. Fred was already seated at the defense table. He wore the same wrinkled suit he'd worn to the gala. His hands were clasped in front of him, knuckles pale. For the first time in my life, I saw something real in his face. Fear. Monica was in the back row. She had her arms crossed, eyes darting between me and Fred. Dean wasn't there, probably too embarrassed. The judge entered. "All rise." We stood. I kept my back straight, hands folded behind me. "Case 227A," the clerk said. "Interference with federal operations, obstruction of classified communications, and unauthorized attainment of a U.S. military officer." Fred's lawyer, a tired man with a limp tie, stood. "Your Honor, my client didn't know who she was. There was no intent. It was a family misunderstanding." The judge didn't flinch. He handcuffed a high-ranking officer during a Pentagon briefing. The lawyer shrugged. An unfortunate confusion. Then it was my turn. I stepped onto the witness stand, raised my right hand, and took the oath. "General Moore," the judge said, "please explain what happened on the morning in question." I spoke slowly, clearly, how I had just returned from an overseas mission, how I was mid-call with senior military officials when my stepfather broke in, ignored my warnings, and handcuffed me to a bedpost while I was giving live intel on a classified matter. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The courtroom was frozen. Fred kept wiping his face with his hand, like he could wipe the truth away. "Was there any indication," the judge asked, "that your stepfather believed he was preventing harm?" I shook my head. "No, Your Honor. He simply didn't like that I had authority in his home. He saw me as a threat, not to his safety, but to his ego." Fred's lawyer objected, but the judge waved it off. "You may continue, General." "I've served this country for 29 years, I said, "and I've dealt with enemies across borders, in deserts and war rooms. But I never thought my own family would become a liability." The courtroom was dead silent. Even Monica looked away. When I stepped down, Fred didn't look at me. He couldn't. The judge called a recess. Outside in the hallway, a young journalist approached me. "General Moore," she said, holding a notepad, "do you believe your stepfather's actions were out of malice or ignorance?" I looked past her at the large courthouse windows. "Does it matter?" I asked. "In either case, people need to understand something. Just because someone wears a smile at dinner doesn't mean they're harmless. And just because someone wears a uniform doesn't mean they're cold. I've spent my life protecting people, even people who didn't protect me." She nodded slowly and backed away. The hearing resumed. Fred was found guilty on 2 counts, obstruction and unlawful detainment of a federal officer. The judge issued a penalty: 6 months of probation, 50 hours of community service and mandatory anger management classes. No jail time, but his record would reflect the charge. His plumbing license was revoked. The state saw him as untrustworthy to operate within private homes. I left the courthouse before the reporters could swarm. The sky was gray. The wind was picking up. Monica caught up to me on the sidewalk. "Jordan, wait." I turned. "What?" She looked worn down. Her lipstick was smudged and her heels wobbled. "I didn't know it would go this far. You could have just talked to us. We're family." I laughed, bitter and quiet. Family doesn't chain each other to bedposts during Pentagon calls. She looked down. "You ruined his life," she whispered. "No," I said. "He did that." I walked away before she could say anything else. Back at the base, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Closure? No, not yet, because Fred had hurt more than just me. He'd hurt my mom, and he thought he'd gotten away with it. That night, I unlocked the old trunk I'd taken from the attic. Inside was something I hadn't noticed before. A notebook. Mom's handwriting. It was a journal. Every page detailed her quiet suffering. How Fred would belittle her when no one was watching. How he twisted her words. Took her money. How he stopped her from calling me when I first deployed. He even convinced her to change her 2 months before she died. The last line read, "I hope Jordan forgives me." My hand trembled as I closed the book. He hadn't just hurt her. He erased her voice. Now it was time I gave it back. The next morning, I made a few calls. One to the local paper in South Bay Ridge. One to a veteran-run foundation that sponsors public memorial benches for military families. And one to a lawyer. The article ran 3 days later. Local general reveals family abuse hidden behind military silence. It included excerpts from Mom's journal. The town read every word. Monica's job at the school board? Suspended pending character review. Dean's application for a small business loan? Denied, citing ongoing investigation into federal obstruction involving immediate family. Fred? Well, Fred had one thing left. The house. The same house my mom once called home. But the lawyer's call that morning? It confirmed what I suspected. There had been a clause in the will Fred edited, a small one he missed. The property was still in my mother's maiden name, and the change hadn't been filed properly, which meant legally. The house was mine. I stood on the porch that evening with the final documents in my hand. Fred opened the door, still in his bathrobe. "What now?" he growled. I held up the envelope. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. His face crumpled like wet paper. You can't, this is my house. It was hers, I said, and now it's mine. I turned and walked off the porch as he shouted after me, voice cracking. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem, I said without turning back. But even as I walked away, heart pounding, I knew this wasn't the end. Because Fred was desperate now, and a desperate man does stupid things. I just didn't know how far he'd go, until he showed up where he wasn't supposed to. And this time, he didn't bring handcuffs. He brought something much worse. I was in my office at Fort Langley when my assistant knocked. Ma'am, there's a situation. I looked up from the map spread across my desk. What kind of situation? She hesitated. Your stepfather's in the building. I stood so fast my chair rolled back. How did he get through security? He said he was family. Told the guard at the gate you were expecting him. We didn't see any reason to. Lock the building down, I said, grabbing my badge and walking fast. Now, I headed toward the East Wing, an area used mostly for visiting personnel and civilian contractors. When I turned the corner, I saw him, Fred, standing in the lobby like he owned the place, holding a manila envelope in one hand and a smug expression on his face. He looked rough, pale, sweat on his forehead, clothes rumpled. Whatever dignity he once had was gone. Get out, I said, not breaking stride. I just want to talk. I don't care. He stepped in front of me, blocking my path. I lost everything, Jordan. Everything. My business. My house. Even Monica won't return my calls. Dean says I'm bad luck. And you, he pointed at me, eyes wild. You ruined my life. You did that all by yourself. I gave you a home. You gave me scars, I snapped, and my mother grief. And then you tried to destroy the one thing that gave me purpose. You handcuffed a general mid-Pentagon call. That wasn't a mistake. That was control. He was shaking now. I came here because I need money, he said. Just a little. Alone. I can get back on my feet. I stared at him, a man who once screamed in my face because I forgot to replace the milk, who once made my mom cry for taking a longer shower, who humiliated me in front of my siblings, in front of teachers, in front of strangers, and now he was standing in a government building he should have never been allowed inside, begging for help from the girl he once called worthless. I turned to my assistant, who stood nearby, frozen. Call base security. Escort him out. If he steps foot on this base again, arrest him. Fred's face twisted with rage. You can't do this. I just did. 2 MPs appeared seconds later. They grabbed him by the arms and began walking him out. I should have thrown you out when you were a kid, he yelled over his shoulder. I should have sent you to one of those group homes. You were always a mistake, a freak. And then he said it, words that pierced deeper than I expected. Your mom never even wanted you. I flinched. For 1 second, just one, I felt like the kid again, the one hiding behind a closet door as Fred shouted at Mom in the kitchen. But then I remembered. The journal, the bedtime lullabies, the packed lunches, the time she stayed awake all night sewing my uniform for the JROTC event. She wanted me. She just didn't know how to fight him. Fred was dragged out, screaming. The MPs closed the doors behind him. I stood in silence. Not sad, not even angry, just tired. The next morning, I filed a restraining order. But it didn't stop there. A week later, I started getting blocked calls. I ignored them. Then I got one from a private number late at night. When I answered, no one spoke. Then I heard heavy breathing and a whisper. You think you're safe behind a uniform, little girl? Click. The call disconnected. My stomach twisted. I traced the number. It was a burner phone, untraceable. But I knew it was him. Fred wasn't going away quietly. He was desperate, cornered, and angry. And desperate men do desperate things. I had security reassigned to my home. I carried a concealed sidearm. Every door and window had sensors. Still, I didn't feel safe. One morning, I walked outside and saw it. A dead bird, laid neatly on the hood of my car. No blood, just stillness. The message was clear. I'd taken his home, his pride, his control. And now, he wanted mine. I contacted the FBI. "Keep eyes on him," I said. "He's escalating." But they needed something more than whispers and threats to act. Then came the day I was called to D.C. for a classified operations review. It was standard, routine. I packed a go bag, threw on my dress uniform, and got in my vehicle. Halfway there, I got an alert. My home security system had been disabled, then re-enabled. I hit the brakes and called the base. "Send someone to my house. Now." I turned around. Fast. Tires screeching. When I got home, the door was wide open. Inside, drawers were pulled out. Cabinets emptied. Someone had broken in. And worse, they knew the codes. There was no forced entry. Fred had been watching. Maybe followed me one day. Maybe guessed my code from an old password Mom used to use. But one thing was clear. He'd crossed the line. I made a call. To the Pentagon. I was done playing nice. "Activate Shadow Protocol," I said. "Authorization," the voice asked. "More, Jordan." "General." "Code Zulu Bravo 19. There was a pause. Then, confirmed. The wheels were in motion. Fred had no idea what was coming next. He thought this was still about the house. About pride. About revenge. He didn't realize he had triggered something bigger. Because when you violate the home of a senior military officer, it's not just personal, it's national. The next morning, I stood in front of a press conference podium at the Pentagon, preparing for a scheduled announcement. But before I could speak, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a priority alert. Fred had just been spotted on a traffic camera. He was only 3 blocks away, heading toward me. And this time, he wasn't alone. I stared at the alert on my phone. Subject Fred Allen Moore. Detected 3 blocks northeast of Pentagon perimeter. Accompanied by unknown individual. Vehicle black sedan. No plates. It wasn't just a visit. This was a move. I stepped away from the podium as another officer took over the press briefing. My phone buzzed again, this time the image feed. Traffic cam footage showed Fred in the passenger seat of a black sedan. He was pointing, giving directions, animated and angry. The driver, a man I didn't recognize, wore dark shades and a camo jacket. Not standard issue. "Get me eyes in the air now," I said, walking fast. "Notify local Metro PD. Seal off entry lanes." "Copy that," came the voice in my earpiece. Alert level raised to Tier 3. My security team moved with me down the corridor, past classified strategy rooms, through steel-reinforced doors. I changed directions midway and took a secured elevator to the sub-basement, a communications hub with a direct line to Joint Command and civilian intel agencies. I was done waiting. Deploy intercept team to Route 17. Target, black sedan, no tags. Suspected individuals approaching Pentagon security zone with malicious intent. 1 confirmed hostile history. "Yes, ma'am." Outside, the sun was bright, sky spotless, and within minutes, the convoy was moving. 5 black SUVs, silent engines, tinted glass, trained drivers. They didn't use sirens. They didn't need to. I rode in the lead vehicle. My heart wasn't pounding. My hands weren't shaking. This wasn't fear. It was focus. Fred had played games with me for years. Gaslight my mother into silence. Threatened me. Humiliated me in my own country, in my own home. And now, he was trying to breach the single, most secure military facility on U.S. soil. I wasn't going to let it happen. The SUV cut through traffic, escorted by 2 unmarked units from Metro PD. "We have visual," said the driver. "Target vehicle approaching Pennsylvania and 18th. Red light stopping. Should we engage?" Do it, I said. All 5 SUVs surrounded the black sedan before the light could turn green. 2 pulled in front, 2 behind. 1 cut across the driver's side, boxing them in. Doors flung open. Armed officers in plain, tactical gear shouted commands. Hands where we can see them. Out of the vehicle. The driver complied. But Fred? Fred locked the passenger door and stayed inside, pointing at the nearest officer, shouting something no one could hear. I stepped out. He saw me through the window. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't yell. He didn't curse. He just stared. Pale. Sunken. Like he'd seen a ghost. I walked up slowly and tapped the glass. Step out of the car, Fred. He hesitated. I raised my badge, black leather, gold trim, the seal of the United States Department of Defense. You're not walking away from this one. The door creaked open. Fred stepped out, hands trembling. He looked smaller than I remembered. His clothes were baggy, his eyes bloodshot. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked lost. What is this? He said, voice cracking. You sent an army after me? No, I said. Just enough to keep you from hurting someone again. The other man, his driver, was cuffed already. Turns out he had a prior for stolen firearms and suspected ties to an extremist group. I didn't know if Fred had known that. I didn't care. Intent was enough. I turned to the officers. Book them both. Charges: attempted unauthorized approach of federal defense perimeter, prior restraining order violation, and suspected conspiracy. Fred lunged then, just a half step, like he was going to say something, but my security officer stepped between us. He never got the words out. Back at the Pentagon, I filed the final report myself. The Department of Justice took the case. He was facing federal time now. Real time. They told me I could rest. That I'd done enough. But rest doesn't come easy when you've lived a life always waiting for the next attack. Still, the weeks that followed were quiet. No more phone calls. No more dead birds. No more rumors. I finally returned to the house, Mom's house. The one Fred had tried to claim as his own. I stood in the living room, surrounded by silence. Her quilt was folded neatly on the couch. Her old radio still worked. It played her favorite jazz station. And then I found it, a note, tucked behind the photo frame of me in uniform. I hadn't seen it before. In her handwriting, faint and tired. To my Jordan, if you're reading this, you made it. I knew you would. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you the way you protected me, but you were always my strongest soldier. I love you, Mom. I sat there and let the tears fall, not because I was sad, but because I had finally truly won, not with violence, not with revenge, but with truth, with power earned the right way, and with a life built not on hate, but on the strength to survive it. A few months later, they offered to name a new facility after me. I said no. Name it after someone like my mom. Someone quiet, kind, and powerful in the ways no one noticed. They agreed. Now, when you drive past South Bay Ridge, there's a bench by the community center. It has her name on it, and under that, a quote. Be kind, not because they deserve it, but because you do. That's the end of my story. And to anyone out there going through something hard, remember this. The world may not see your strength, but that doesn't mean it isn't there. Thanks for listening.